Did you know that before Hollywood locked itself behind the Hays Code, the silver screen was wilder than any backstage rumor? Studio bosses scrambled to bury films that flashed greed, lust, and violence in bold, unrepentant strokes. Today, we dust off those nitrate reels and expose the scandal they tried to erase. Stories so raw they still burn. Stick around, hit that like button, and let's ignite the forgotten fire together. Babyface, 1933. The Great Depression's skyline of shattered dreams towers above a tiny speakeasy where Lily Powers pours bootleg whiskey by night and swears she'll never stay poor again. Barbara Stanwyck smolders as Lily, a woman who weaponizes ambition in her own body, sleeping her way floor by floor up Gotham Trust's glittering skyscraper. Director Alfred E. Green frames each conquest like a rung on a moral ladder to nowhere. A lecherous clerk, a married vice president, even the president's naive son. Audiences gasped when Lily's mentor quotes Nietzsche, urging her to exploit yourself. That single line signaled open season on traditional virtue. Censors howled. The production code office demanded a new ending where Lily is punished. Warner Brothers quietly sliced several seduction scenes and locked the uncensored negative in a vault. Yet word leaked. For women boxed in by breadlines, Lily's ruthless climb felt both shocking and exhilarating. It threatened male power structures and celebrated sexual agency, making Babyface one of the most aggressively suppressed films of the era, and a blueprint for every femme fatale story that followed. Red-Headed Woman, 1932. Jean Harlow's Lil Andrews steps out of a limousine in a backless gown, lights a cigarette, and decides to steal her married boss before the opening credits finish rolling. The film crackles with innuendos, from Harlow flashing lingerie to locking a rival in a closet mid-affair. Lil's brazenness upended Hollywood's fallen woman must repent rule. She seduces, cheats, and shoots, then speeds off to Paris with a rich sugar daddy and zero remorse. Religious groups railed, demanding MGM shelve the picture. Instead, studio head Irving Thalberg trimmed scarcely a minute and smuggled it past state censors with a tongue-in-cheek prologue hinting at moral lessons that never arrive. The backlash was intense. Bans in the South, edits overseas. But the box office boom proved audiences secretly adored watching a woman bend society to her will. Hollywood feared the message, sin sells, and sometimes sinners win. Freaks, 1932. Carnival lights flicker across sideshow tents where conjoined twins croon love songs and a bearded lady rocks her infant. Todd Browning, fresh off Dracula, hired real circus performers for this horror melodrama about betrayal inside a traveling show. When glamorous trapeze artist Cleopatra mocks dwarf Hans, the freaks chant their oath, one of us," and unleash gruesome revenge. Browning's unflinching close-ups of bodies society labeled monstrous forced viewers to confront their own voyeurism. Preview audiences screamed, fainted, and MGM panicked. 30 minutes vanished, including the full mutilation of Cleopatra, and the studio buried the film in its vault for decades. Moralists claimed it exploited disabilities. Execs feared lawsuits. Yet beneath the shock lies a radical plea for dignity. Hollywood hid Freaks because it shredded the beauty standards the industry was built on, and made the real monsters the so-called normal people in the front row. The story of Temple Drake, 1933. Thunderstorms lash a Mississippi plantation as socialite Temple Drake, played by Miriam Hopkins, stumbles into a bootlegger's lair. Loosely adapting William Faulkner's Sanctuary, the film depicts implied rape, murder, and blackmail with a frankness unseen on American screens. Temple's scarred psyche and her final courtroom confession suggests trauma far darker than the censors allowed audiences to hear outright. Southern politicians threatened boycotts. State boards demanded the entire kidnapping sequence be axed. Paramount sliced what it could and still lost markets. The uproar hammered home that explicit sexual violence would not be tolerated, leading directly to stricter enforcement of the code in July 1934. Temple Drake became a ghost, seldom reissued, proof that Hollywood would silence any narrative hinting respectable society could crumble in a single terrifying night. Scarface, 1932. Tommy gun bullets rip across a neon X, director Howard Hawks' signature calling card of death, as Paul Mooney's Tony Camonte carves a bloody empire modeled on Al Capone. Scarface revels in bribes, body counts, and incestuous undertones between Tony and his sister Cheska. Newspapers blamed it for glamorizing gangsters at the height of Prohibition, while civic groups demanded the government halt its release. The studio submitted three endings: death by police, execution, and life in prison. None satisfied every censor, but United Artists reluctantly shipped the "crime doesn't pay" cut with a moralizing foreword. In cities like Chicago, entire reels vanished or screenings were outlawed. Hollywood feared real-world gangsters might react, and that audiences would idolize Camonte's swagger despite his downfall. Scarface proved violence, not romance, could be just as scandalous when the line between newsreel and fiction blurred. The Sign of the Cross, 1932. Torchlight shimmers over marble as Emperor Nero orders Christians to the lions in Cecil B. DeMille's epic. Between decadent Roman orgies, Claudette Colbert bathes nude in donkey milk, and muscular gladiators wrestle in barely their loincloths. DeMille layers religious piety atop sensual spectacle, daring audiences to judge or secretly enjoy the carnality. Catholic leaders branded the movie blasphemous, women's groups slammed its sexual content. Several states demanded deletions of the milk bath and a lesbian dance before granting permits. Paramount trimmed scenes for decades, restoring them only for 1990s re-releases. Hollywood hid The Sign of the Cross because it exposed a profitable formula. Wrap eroticism in biblical robes and call it art, an equation too lucrative and too controversial for censors to tolerate openly. Island of Lost Souls, 1932. Waves crash against a fog-shrouded island where Dr. Moreau, played by Charles Laughton with a sadistic grin, vivisects animals into half-human beastmen. Director Early C. Kentons fills the jungle with screams, surgical knives, and the unnerving panther woman who whispers, "Do you like me?" The film's cruelty and interspecies erotic tension sparked immediate outrage. Britain banned it until 1958. Multiple U.S. states followed. Paramount felt the heat long after opening weekend, withdrawing prints and shelving plans for sequels. The movie's stark questions, what makes us human? How far will science go? Were eclipsed by shock over its body horror visuals. Hollywood tried to hide Island of Lost Souls because it made audiences squirm at the thought that civilization, stripped of morality, is only a scalpel slice away from savagery. Tarzan and His Mate, 1934. Dawn breaks over the African jungle as Jane, played by Maureen O'Sullivan, slips into a lagoon wearing nothing but a transparent chemise. What follows is Hollywood's first nude underwater ballet, 3 unbroken minutes of ethereal swimming beside Johnny Weissmuller's muscular Tarzan. The scene thrills audiences but horrifies studio chiefs. Regional censors slash it to seconds or scrap it entirely. The rest of the picture doubles down on sensuality. Jane lounging in a barely laced halter, Tarzan howling with primal desire, and a savage climax where ivory poachers are trampled by elephants. Why hide it? Because the Hays office was sharpening its knives. Catholic watchdogs argued the film reduced women to jungle decor and glorified extramarital passion. MGM pulled Prince, replaced the nude double with a modest swimsuit in later releases, and quietly pretended the original never existed. Yet rumors spread, making The Lost Swim the most talked about 3 minutes Hollywood tried to drown. Blonde Venus, 1932. Berlin cabaret lights flicker as Marlene Dietrich, cloaked in a gorilla suit, peels off the fur to reveal a sequined, barely there costume. Her character, Helen Faraday, is a mother who turns to high-class prostitution to fund her husband's medical care. The film paints sultry, late-night encounters that blur love, survival, and lust, climaxing with Dietrich crooning "hot voodoo" while men toss money at her feet. Censors recoiled at the idea of a sympathetic sex worker, especially one who returns to domestic life without punishment. Paramount sliced references to paid trysts, but couldn't hide the smoky eroticism radiating off the screen. The studio later restricted circulation, fearing the film would be proof that European sophistication equaled moral decay. Blonde Venus showcased a woman controlling her own sexuality, precisely the independence 1930s moralists wanted buried. Night Nurse, 1931. Night falls over a children's ward where Barbara Stanwyck's Laura Hart discovers a sinister plot. A boozy chauffeur, Clark Gable before stardom, starves two little girls to steal their inheritance. Director William A. Wellman doesn't flinch. Babies cry, nurses strip Stanwyck down to her slip, and Laura smuggles bootleg liquor for an operation. Add in an on-screen beating and a rare-for-the-time anti-hero ending, and you have a thriller that tore through taboos like a runaway ambulance. State boards banned it for depicting child abuse and showing nurses undressing. Warner Brothers recut scenes, but the stench of controversy lingered. Prince quietly disappeared from many theaters after a brief run. Hollywood tried to hide Night Nurse because it suggested that society's guardians, doctors, chauffeurs, even hospitals, could be villains, a notion too chilling for Depression-era audiences seeking escape. She Done Him Wrong, 1933. Mae West sashays through a New York Bowery saloon, tossing one-liners sharper than a switchblade. "Why don't you come up sometime and see me?" Her Lady Lou is a diamond-draped ex-con who runs a bar, toys with jealous gangsters, and brazenly seduces a Salvation Army captain, Cary Grant. The film is a parade of corsets, double entendres, and whispered crimes, and it clocks in at a lean 66 minutes only because censors hacked it down. Pressure groups called West's screen persona a walking sin. Paramount paid fines, then limited reissues, terrified her cheeky libido would inspire real-life rebellion. Yet She Done Him Wrong saved the studio from bankruptcy, proving audiences craved unapologetic desire. Hollywood hid its risque jokes later, but West's immortal wink kept echoing, daring future filmmakers to push past prudery. Trouble in Paradise, 1932. Moonlight glints off Venice's canals as jewel thief Gaston Monescu, Herbert Marshall, and pickpocket Lily, Miriam Hopkins, flirt by comparing wallets they just stole. Director Ernst Lubitsch bathes every scene in sophisticated innuendo. Champagne breakfasts in silk pajamas, lovers swapping identities, and an ending that cheers dishonesty over respectability. No one is punished. In fact, crime is positively chic. Moral crusaders stormed Paramount demanding a recall, calling it a love letter to larceny. Lubitsch refused to tack on a moral, so the studio withdrew the movie from U.S. circulation once the code cracked down in 1934. For decades, Trouble in Paradise became a phantom masterpiece, screened only in private clubs. Hollywood hid it because it suggested the most intoxicating aphrodisiac isn't virtue. It's getting away with it. Three on a Match, 1932. New York's skyline looms over three schoolgirls who strike a single match, an omen that one will die within a year. Their adult lives spiral. Vivian, Ann Dvorak, abandons her son for a gangster and descends into cocaine addiction, shown via stark montages of powder-filled spoons and hollow eyes. Director Mervyn LeRoy pushes boundaries with kidnapping, suicide, and a slow-motion bullet through a window that shatters every shred of hope. Parent groups decried its drug imagery, censors slashed scenes of snorting, and stripped references to narcotics. Warner Brothers buried the uncensored negative, re-releasing only Baudelarized versions. Hollywood hid Three on a Match because it exposed a grim reality. Beneath the jazz-age glitter, addiction and desperation could devour anyone, especially society women audiences were supposed to envy. The Public Enemy, 1931. Rain hammers Chicago's sidewalks as Tom Powers, James Cagney, smashes a grapefruit into his girlfriend's face. A moment so shocking it became cinematic legend. Director William A. Wellman chronicles Tom's rise from street thug to bootleg king, with brutal gunfights, beer hijackings, and a final shot of his corpse delivered to his mother's door. Instead of sermonizing, the film lets violence speak for itself, daring viewers to both thrill and recoil. Cities like Kansas City cut entire gun battles. Others demanded an epilogue condemning gang life. Warner Brothers grudgingly tacked on a moralistic crawl, but couldn't soften Cagney's electric menace. After Prohibition ended, the studio shelved further distribution to avoid reigniting debates over screen violence. Hollywood hid the Public Enemy because it held up a mirror to real-world crime, and audiences liked the reflection too much. Female, 1933. Night falls over the roaring Motor City, but inside the marble offices of the Drake Motor Company, it is Ruth Chatterton's Allison Drake who roars loudest. She is the president, yes, the boss, of an automobile empire that answers to every eyebrow she lifts. At the stroke of 5, Allison trades boardroom blueprints for silk lounging pajamas and summons whichever handsome engineer has caught her eye that week. Chauffeurs deposit these men at her mansion, and the script leaves nothing to doubt about what happens between cocktails and dawn. Her oldest confidant, a kindly mechanic, warns her she is playing with human spark plugs, but Allison only laughs. What made Hollywood flinch was the idea that a woman could run a corporation and treat men as disposable toys, then feel no guilt in the morning. Studio publicists tried to blunt the impact with posters that called the film a modern love story. Yet gossip columns buzzed with shock. Female executives were rare enough in the real world, let alone one depicted as sexually predatory. Pressure groups insisted Warner Brothers must punish her on screen. After fierce debate, censors want a compromise. Allison agrees to settle down with her newest engineer, but sly dialogue hints she will still inspect the factory floor whenever boredom strikes. Prince with the racy swimming pool scene quietly vanished in many states. Hollywood hid Female because it exposed a fear buried deep in the patriarchal gears of Tinseltown. If women ever seized the steering wheel, they might drive desire and industry profits anywhere they pleased. Murders in the Zoo, 1933. A moonlit gala at a city zoo turns macabre when a socialite collapses, a pair of needle-fine fang marks glistening on his throat. Lionel Atwill's Eric Gorman, big game hunter, jealous husband, and amateur toxicologist, smiles as the victim's pulse fades. From its opening shock, Gorman sewing a rival's lips shut in the jungle, to alligator pits and cobra-filled handbags, Murders in the Zoo drenches every act of infidelity and blood. Even the heroine's pet leopard prowls ballroom floors like an omen of carnage. Preview audiences shrieked, one fainted. Religious reviewers condemned its sadism and cynical view of marriage, where jealousy becomes justified homicide. Paramount trimmed several killings, but state boards in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts still banned the film outright. Theater owners begged for a tamer cut. The studio instead buried it after a single re-release, quietly shelving any hope of sequels. Hollywood tried to hide Murders in the Zoo because it shattered the illusion that punishment could remain tasteful. It asked a chilling question. When civilization keeps wild beasts in cages, who is truly imprisoned? Them or us? Safe in Hell, 1931. New Orleans humidity sticks like guilt as call girl Gilda Carlson flees a murder rap by boarding a tramp steamer to a Caribbean island with no extradition treaty. On arrival, she learns the only other white women are convicts. The local jail doubles as a hotel for fugitives whose keys turn only from the outside. Director William A. Wellman serves up rum sweat tension. Gilda stalks veranda shadows in clinging silk, while predatory men lounge below, each convinced he can buy her. Her fiancé, a merchant sailor, vows to rescue her, but storm tides delay his return, forcing Gilda into a desperate bargain she knows will damn her soul. Safe in Hell was a grenade tossed at every comfort zone. It showed prostitution as economic survival, colonial authorities as corrupt, and redemption as something a woman might choose to sacrifice rather than submit. The Hayes office demanded cuts to a whipping scene and any hint Gilda had serviced clients on the island. Wellman refused, so Warner Brothers released it regionally and withdrew domestic prints within a year. Critics later called it a proto-feminist noir, but in 1931, executives hid it because it dared claim that sometimes virtue dies so a woman can live another day. The Bitter Tea of General Yen, 1933. Shanghai's harbor glitters with gunfire during the Chinese Civil War as missionary Megan Davis, Barbara Stanwyck, is rescued, then seduced by warlord General Yen, a Nils Astor. Director Frank Capra films their encounters in exotic candlelight. Yen offering silk slippers, Megan trembling between repulsion and fascination. An opium-fueled dream sequence shows Megan in a diaphanous gown, surrendering to Yen's kiss while snakes coil around their throne, a tableau dripping with taboo racial overtones. Audiences in 1933 balked at interracial romance, and religious leaders blasted the film for carving immorality into stone. Columbia yanked advertisements in the South after theaters reported empty seats. Though Capra later blamed misfortune on poor timing, insiders whispered the studio locked negatives to avoid government calls for tighter race depictions. Hollywood hid the bitter tea of General Yen because it exposed the hypocrisy of preaching Christian charity while criminalizing love across color lines. In a world itching to separate us from them, Capra dared stage a love story and paid in box office exile. Designed for Living, 1933. A Paris Garrett pulses with laughter as struggling playwright Tom, Frederick March, and painter George, Gary Cooper, fall equally, hopelessly in love with free-spirited Gilda Farrell, Miriam Hopkins. Ernst Lubitsch adapts Noel Coward's play, but trades drawing room wit for champagne-soaked candor. The trio agrees on a gentleman's truce of no sex and fails within hours. Scenes of shared beds, playful spankings, and Gilda admitting she needs both men sparked outrage before the first reel unspooled. Censors decried the ménage à trois as a direct attack on marriage. Newspapers dubbed it three-bed sheet scandal. The studio added a tacked-on scene where Gilda submits to a loveless wedding, but Lubitsch's final fade-out shows her back in the artist's loft, Tom and George on either side. Three smiles framed in cozy silence. Despite critical praise, Designed for Living vanished from reissue lists when the code took full force. Hollywood hid it because it suggested happiness might not fit tidy definitions, and because its laughter encouraged audiences to imagine their own rule-breaking blueprints. Call Her Savage, 1932. A dust storm sweeps across Texas ranch land as Clara Bow's NASA Springer whips a rattlesnake, then rides bareback through a prairie fire. Just the opening salvo in a film that crams adultery, sadomasochism, and hint of bisexuality into 88 feverish minutes. NASA elopes, gambles in jazz-age Chicago, slaps a socialite rival, and rescues her dog from a burning nightclub before discovering a traumatic family secret tied to Native American ancestry. Every episode feels like a dare. Can silent-era it-girl Bo make the Code's new guardians blush? She did. Scenes of Bo in a torn satin slip wrestling a drunken husband were slashed in some states. Others banned the film entirely for references to venereal disease. Fox executives issued formal apologies, yet secretly loved the ticket sales. When stricter censorship arrived in 1934, Call Her Savage was swept into storage vaults, surfacing only in censored prints decades later. Hollywood hid it because it crowned Bo's transition to talkies with a howl too primal for polite society, proving that beneath the studio gloss beat the heart of a wild frontier America still couldn't tame. These 20 nitrate firebrands prove Hollywood's past was never as innocent as the postcards. Each reel smuggled forbidden thrills, lust, power, violence, past velvet curtains, only to be padlocked when the moral police arrived. But celluloid secrets refuse to die. They survive in bootlegs, archives, and the memories of the brave few who saw them uncut. If you've loved this journey into cinema's hidden vault, smash that like button, share with fellow film renegades, and subscribe for our next excavation into forgotten Hollywood. The projector's bulb may dim, but scandalous light always finds a crack.